Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2024, week 15. That is April 8th to April 14th, and we are right back on trying to get this header off and clearancing the header. So what we're doing right here is we're just getting my new oxygen tank all set up, getting the torches all ready to go. And then what I'm going to do is on the car, I'm going to grab a clamp and I'm just going to try and heat up the header and clearance it on the car. Alright, so we are going to start with this very front tube, so we'll get the torch going, we'll get it nice and hot, we'll get in there, we'll heat up the header, and then we'll take the clamp and we'll just, try and squeeze that header down a little bit just to give us enough clearance to clear this shaft. And now I'm going to try and figure out a way to get into this back tube. It's in there quite tight, so I grab a long punch and a hammer and just try and make sure I can get in there and get at it. And yeah, it's okay. It's not the greatest thing to be beating on this stuff in the car, but we're going to try it. So get stuff out of the way, try and make sure we can get the torch in there, light the torch, and then I ended up, the torch was actually hitting the brake line, so I was like, I don't like this. This is just a dumb thing to do. Let's stop being lazy, pull your head out of your ass, and let's just get the header off. So in order to get the header off, the easiest way I think is, pull the intercooler off, and I can't go underneath the car, just because there's pipes in the way and the way the steering shaft is, it's not clearing the, steering rack. So I'm going to pull the header off, pull the intercooler off. I'm going to get the header loose and try and see if I can go down. And then what I eventually end up doing is I'm like, I'm going to try and see if I can just pull this straight out of the car front way, because I got the engine plate there. I can easily take the engine plate off, just support the engine, take the engine plate off, and then see if I can pull this out via the front. So I struggle with this for a bit, trying to get it to go down, try to get the steering shaft out, and then that's what I'm going to do. Just take that, jack up the engine, hold the engine in place, take the engine plate off, and see if I can pull the header out through the front. All right. Well, that was a lot of work for not being able to pull this out through the front of the car. And so now I am just going to step back for a few seconds and try and figure out what I can do about this. Because the steering shaft is stuck in the column. It doesn't want to come out. So it's just like, kind of, fuck, what do I do? So what I'm going to end up doing is go in the car. I'm going to drop the steering column. You know, with the steering column drop, that shaft is loose. It'll move. I should be able to get the steering column and the steering shaft out of the header. And then I can drop the header back out the bottom of the car. And then I can take it over and clearance it. So all that means that I did not, in any way, shape, or form, need to take the engine plate off. That was all a waste of time. Because here I got, some clearance, and we're going to pull out the steering shaft. We're just going to kind of have to beat on the shaft a bit to get to clearance the header. And so a lot of added work when I should have just dropped the column. I should have just tried to, work the header out, and then after that, it easily comes out the bottom. So spent a lot of time wasting my time for just not wanting to drop the column for some reason. And now I'm going to spend a few seconds trying to get the steering shaft out of the steering column, and that doesn't work. It's just an effort and futility. So I'll deal with that another time. I don't like having the engine supported by the oil pan and just 2x4, so let's just quickly throw that engine plate back on there. All right, so now it's time to clean off the fab table, and we are going to throw the headers up there, heat them up, and beat the crap out of them. Luckily, this isn't the first time I've done this, so the second time around, it was a lot easier of a pill to swallow. I was just like, okay, whatever, we just got to do what we got to do. So, yeah, we're just going to heat them up, beat them up, and then we'll see if we can't get it reinstalled. Alright, now that everything has had a chance to cool down, let's go about reinstalling this header. So we throw the steering shaft, and I can laugh about this now, through the wrong pipe. I threw that through the front one. It's supposed to go through between number 3 and 4. So I throw that in there, and I'm having a hell of a time trying to figure out why in the fuck I cannot get the steering shaft to line up. Like, I'm just like, what the hell is going on here? Why isn't this working? And I think I eventually realized that I'm an idiot. And yeah, so here I am, repositioning this, trying to go back through the third one. It's like, okay, now I got to redrop the column, and I can dick around with it. So can't forget to put the gasket on there. So just kind of mess around with it. We'll get the gasket in place, then we'll get some bolts and throw in the jack stand under the back of it. Just kind of hold it at the more or less the right angle, and then we can start getting some bolts into this. Yeah, so with those bolts, we can kind of get the steering column all lifted up and back into place. can throw the steering column back on the steering rack. I'm just going to do a little kind of by the eye lining, you know, the front end up and the rack and stuff like that. It's nothing, it is not a critical dimension at this point. All right, with that back on, it is time to open our box from LMR. We got some goodies. So in here, we got some new nice long lug nuts. We have some a new clutch switch. We got some front wheel hub locking nuts. We got some front wheel hubs to replace the ones that were on this, because I bought these used, so I don't want to use used stuff. We got a shift knob. We got a shift handle. Dowel pins for the timing cover, some reverse light bulbs, hopefully those work, and then finally, oh yeah, I got some oil filters, got gaskets, and then finally a brand new timing cover. So very quickly, before I start doing anything, I'm going to grab a gasket, I'm going to grab the water pump, I'm going to make sure that these things are lining up as expected this time, and that this timing cover should work for what we need. And thankfully, yes, everything is lining up, everything is coming up Millhouse. Well, since the timing cover is going to work, I decided to look at the shifter. So open up the shifter, look at the instructions, and we're going to go and quickly just chuck it in the car and see if it works. And of course, the shifter bolts don't work with that shifter, and the holes in the handle are too small. The shifter on the 256, I think, is like 3/8/24, and the holes in the shifter handle are only 5/16. Came with 5/16 bolts, I think. So I'm just looking up on the phone, because that's sometimes what you got to do is, you know, you're running something, so you just quickly look it up on the phone. So I'm grabbing up my tap and die set to see if I can figure out exactly what the threads are. I never did end up getting a definite value, but I am fairly confident it's 3/8/24, so 3/8 fine thread. I think it's 3/8/24. In any case, what I'm going to end up doing is just take a couple 1/4-inch bolts, throw it through the shifter and the shift handle, because 1/4-inch is small enough to fit just straight through both the holes, and just very loosely tighten it up just to kind of play with the shifter a little bit. It's not actually going to work, but it's what we're going to do. And this is definitely not the final form of this. I am going to have to do something to make this properly secure, but as just a test, that's fine. All right, so now we are actually going to get on switching out this timing cover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen off the remove the four front bolts that bolt up into the timing cover, and then I'm going to loosen the rest of the bolts on the pan so I can drop the pan down a little bit. After that, I'll undo all the bolts on the timing cover, pull the timing cover out, make sure I put some RTV sealant around the water pump holes in the block on both sides of the gasket. That way I can almost guarantee there is no leak, even if, because there might be some deformations in the block or on the timing cover. That's just going to ensure it seals. So as I'm loosening this off, what's happening is there's still some residual water in the block, and that's kind of leaking down. I don't really want that water to leak into the oil pan because I'm hoping to not have to change the oil. But if I get too much water in the oil pan, I will have to change the oil. So just trying to, dry it off and make sure we don't get anything falling down in there. Throw some paper towels just in the holes to soak it up a little bit. Yeah, so there's the timing cover off. We got the timing chain, everything that, we would expect to see under the timing cover. And we are going to go ahead and start getting the new one on. Now, ideally, I should have dropped the pan down quite a bit more, only because the way the front seal sits on the timing cover, it kind of sits in a little groove, and with the timing or with the oil pan not dropped as much, it's just very difficult to get it properly placed. So I end up taking a pick and I actually ripped the gasket in the top left corner a little bit. So I'm really hoping that doesn't come to bite me in the ass, because that could be really bad. But I did put a little extra bit of sealant there, just to make sure that the oil pan gasket has a little bit extra sealant in that area. Not a ton, but enough. And one thing I'm doing right now is I'm going to run this tap through all of the water pump holes in the block. I didn't do this when I initially cleaned up the block and I was building the engine, and I found that when I was reinstalling the water pump bolts, one of the bolts on the bottom of the water pump, it did not bottom all the way out. Now, when I ran this tap in that hole, I got so much gunk out of there. So what had ended up happening is, gunk and oil and whatever had gotten into the hole. And then while I was trying to torque the bolt. It torqued up fine, but it's because there was so much gunk filling that hole that the bolt torqued up against the gunk and didn't torque against the actual water pump to hold it. So cleaning these holes out is just a really good thing to do. Okay, so with that all torqued, the next thing we're going to do is install a new front seal in the timing cover. So I'm just going to grab my, what is that? The bearing seal installer kit. We'll loosely put it on there, and then we'll put the timing cover on the floor, beat it in. All right, with that front seal installed, I'm just cleaning off a little bit of the RTV sealant on that oil pan seal. I'm gonna put a little bit new on there, and then I'm gonna put the timing cover on. Now, what you're going to see is I'm just gonna put this timing cover straight on. I'm gonna start bolting it up, but what I forgot to put in are the dowel pins. So looking at the block at the bottom right, there's kind of a big hole where a bolt goes through it. Well, there's going to be a little metal dowel pin that actually gets installed into there, and I've forgotten to put it on at this point. But that's to locate the timing cover. So with those dowel pins installed, in theory, the bottom of the timing cover should be in line with the bottom surface of the engine. So that way, when the oil pan goes up, it's got a very flat surface to seal up against. Now, as I said, I forgot to put them on, so I'm going through that right now. I'm gonna get the timing cover on. I'm gonna start bolting it together, and then I'm gonna realize that I forgot to put them on, so I take it all back off and put them in, and then that makes it harder for the timing cover to go back on. So anyways, enjoy me putting this timing cover on. All right, so here's those dowel pins going in. So we got the first one in, getting the second one, it started going sideways, and then I dropped the damn dowel pin into the oil pan. Holy crap, that's bad, because if I can't fish this out of there, that means that I need to take the oil pan off. But fortunately, I was able to get the dowel pin out of the pan. So this time I'm throwing a towel or just paper towel under there. So if I drop it again, you know, it's not a big deal. But holy crap, that was scary. So now that the dowel pins are in there, now I can attempt to reinstall this again. And with the dowel pins on, it makes it harder, and this is why I should have dropped the oil pan a lot more. And in the future, if I ever had to do this again, I would drop that oil pan quite a bit more. Because yeah, getting this seal in place is a pain in the ass. Well, it's on, the seal's lined up, it's time to put all the bolts in and get this torqued back up. Alright, so now that timing cover's back on, time to clean up a little bit of a mess. And now it's time to torque all of the oil pan bolts. Alright, with that all torqued up, we can do a little tiny bit of cleanup here. Alright, so I'm getting my welder out, and the reason why I'm getting my welder out is because while I have all of the front accessories off the car, I think this is the absolute perfect time to get some more welds on my engine plate mounts that weld onto the front end. And the reason why, I've only got a couple of small tacks on either side, and it's just not enough to really hold it long term. So I'm going to throw some more welds on both of those on either side and just get that done because I got access to it right now. right, well, with those tabs welded up, it is time to start reassembling the front end on this. You've seen me put this stuff together close up, so that's why I'm just kind of doing a little bit of a further out angle. That way you can kind of see as I'm going back and forth between the box and the car and tools and whatever. Alrighty. We are the next day from putting all that back together. I wanted to make sure the RTV had ample time to seal and or firm up or set. And so now we are going to throw some water in this rad. Pray we do not get a leak from the water pump, because if we did, that would just be so sad if I had to pull all that stuff right back off again. So yeah, so we got a pile of water in the rad. I'm not getting any leaks out of the water pump at this point in time, but I'm just going to throw a towel over the coils and whatnot just to keep them a little bit drier. I mean, they are a sealed unit with sealed plugs, but it doesn't hurt to keep them a little bit dry. So I'm just going to move into the car, do a quick check, make sure I got no leaks at my heater core lines on the inside of the car. I don't. That's good. And what I want to do now is I want to put a fuse in my water pump, because I want to actually run the water pump. Now, one thing that you may see here is when I turn the water pump on, it's also turning my fuel pump on. If you go back and see when I turned the water pump on, the red light on the fuel pump also came on. And so with that, I'm like, what the hell's going on? So I'm taking the switch panel off because I'm like, maybe I wired this incorrectly. And then I look at my absolutely stunning wire job there. And no, I did not wire that incorrectly. So why is it when I turn the water pump on, the fuel pump's coming on and vice versa? Well, because what I did here is I jumped the fuel pump, the fuel injectors, and the coils. So what happens when I turn the switch on to, say, the fuel pump, it supplies power to the pin on the left side, which also supplies power to all of the other devices in that chain. Okay, so I need to rewire this. So what I need to do is I still want, I think it's J2 on the Dominator to be my fuel pump. So when you turn the key on, it does fuel pump prime. It does all that things that it's supposed to do. But then I'm going to need to wire in new outputs for the Dominator, for the water pump, for the ignition, or for the coils and for the fuel injectors. And that's okay. We can do that. But while that's happening, I have found some leaks in the car. The thermostat housing wasn't super tight. The AN fittings for the heater hoses weren't super tight, so we've just gone through and quickly tightened those up. And I'm just kind of doing a few little tidy up things here. The belt for the Pro Charger is really tight to that idler, so I'm just trying to see if I can move that at all. Yeah, all in all, everything is going good, other than we got some wiring to do, which that's okay. I love doing wiring anyways. So I'm just checking, and yep, not really losing any water out of the rad as far as the eye can see. Can quickly throw the switch panel back up there. Well, we were doing a little bit of cleanup here, just taking a look around, and then I noticed something under the car, grabbed the camera, and there was a big puddle under the car. Oh, man. So we got a leak somewhere, and it is right under the driver's side head. And so at this point in time, I'm like, shit. I got to try and figure out where this is. I know this is a terrible view for you, but there's really not a lot of space because the leak is on the back of the engine at the head, and it's coming down between the header and the block, so I can't really get the camera in there. But I'm looking and trying to figure out where it is. I can see it's dripping down the engine plate there. So jump on top of the car. I'm trying to figure out where this is. As I said, it looks like it's right at the back of the head, so I need to isolate where it is. So I'm going to grab some paper towel, and I'm just going to start putting it down at the back of the engine to see how far up that head it gets wet. And as it turns out, when I put the paper towel right where the head meets the intake, it's getting wet there. So it's like, in my mind, one of two things, right? Either the head is leaking, which would be catastrophic at this point, or the intake is leaking. And, I'm like, for a head gasket to happen this early, I mean, it's possible. I've run the car without water, so maybe I overheated it and it blew out right there. But it's more than likely the intake. So what I'm going to have to end up doing is, to start, in order to pull the heads off, I got to pull the intake off anyways. So we're going to start with the lowest common denominator. Since I'm thinking it might be the intake that is loose or that is leaking, the first thing I'm going to try after I do some diagnosis here is I'm just going to try and tighten up the rear bolts on the intake just to see if it'll seal up against the head better. So I'm just tightening down those two back bolts a little bit, and it's kind of sketchy doing that because these have a torque spec and you really shouldn't exceed that. So I'm just being real lazy here and hoping that it fixes the leak, but of course it doesn't. And it was silly of me to do that in the first place, but I tried. It might have helped. It didn't. So off comes the intake, and in order to do that, got to undo all the electrical connections, got to undo the fuel connections, pull the distributor. And so, this is a big job, and I'm like, fuck, I'm trying to get this car on the road. I don't want to be spending the next 3-4 hours pulling the intake off and, checking it and then putting it back on. But I have no other choice. I got to do it. I mean, I can't drive the car with the leaking water like this. It's just, it would just be a stupid thing to do. Well, no point crying about it. Let's just get to it. We'll drain the water out of the rad, and then we'll start taking this intake off. All right, we got enough stuff off. We can actually start taking the intake off. Now I get this first bolt off, and I'm like, okay, you got to be very careful. You know, the stud came out, but be very careful not to drop anything down that distributor hole. And what do? The second intake bolt, I drop it straight down the distributor hole. Holy shit, I fucked up. Now, the reason why this is such a big fuck up is I just had all those front accessories, including the timing cover, off. And now I've dropped a bolt straight down into that timing area. You know, did it hit the pan? I know it didn't hit the floor. So where is it sitting? You know, this is a showstopper. You cannot just leave that bolt and continue on and be like, oh, I'm not going to worry about it. You know, it's not going to do anything. This is potentially going to blow your engine up. So I'm like, fuck me. This has gone from just pulling the intake off to I'm potentially pulling the engine out of this car. If, you know, so I'm going to drain the oil out of this. And I'm like, maybe I get lucky and the bolt hit the pan and it's attached to the magnet. That wasn't the case. But long story short, I now need to drop this pan and I need to find that bolt. So I don't want to pull the engine out of the car because that's a lot of work, pulling all the exhaust off the drive shaft, the transmission. You know, it's a lot of work. If I absolutely have to do it, like if I cannot find this, I will do it. But I'm going to try dropping the pan down. So first thing I need to do is drain the oil out, because when I get the pan loose, I don't want to be sloshing around. But I need to drop this K-member. So what I'm going to eventually do is I'm going to put a jack under the front of the K-member, undo the 8 bolts that hold it up, and I'm just going to start pulling it down. I'm going to pull the steering shaft out of the rack, and I'm going to pray that once I drop the oil pan, I have enough, or once I drop the steering rack, I have enough clearance to at least get into the oil pan, see if I can find the nuts, etc., etc. And you know, the great part about this is I just finished retorquing the oil pan when I did the timing cover. So all that work, because I got to drop the pan now, I got to undo it all. So there's probably a good 30-40 minutes of work that I'm going to be redoing because I wasn't smart enough to put a rag in the distributor hole. The worst thing is I know better. I know to put something in the hole to cover it so you don't drop stuff into it. But I didn't do that. So I got to undo these brake lines because I got brake lines along the front cross member. So I got to undo the brake line on both sides in order to drop that cross member down. I'm not going to undo any of the steering components with the hope that I can leave like the tie rods on and it'll just droop down enough to get it clearanced. But yeah, let's just get to pulling this down. There's no, again, it's something I got to do. There's no point crying about it, no point waiting, just do it. right, so we get the pan down. I start looking inside the pan. I don't see that nut. This is not a good thing. And it's not good because if I can't find that nut and I know it went down that distributor hole, that means the engine's coming out and I'm tearing it down until I find that nut. So just looking around, checking in the distributor gear, and I find it. The nut is sitting on top of the crank sprocket in the timing chain. So I'll show you here in a second. I know it's hard to see, almost impossible to see. I think I have a picture on my Instagram, but it's sitting right on top of the crank sprocket on the backside of the timing chain. So had I tried to roll this engine over, that bolt would have gone right between the timing chain and the cam gear, and chances are it would have broken a lot of stuff. If the timing chain didn't snap, it might have put so much force on the crank sprocket that it would have broken, or the cam sprocket, or like, I don't know, it could have been catastrophic. So I'm glad that I found it, but I gotta spend a bunch of time working just to get this out. And eventually what happens is I push the nut far enough forward that it drops and comes out, and there it is. Holy shit, that is such a relief that I got that out. But now I gotta put the oil pan back up, I gotta put the suspension, and then once all of that's back up, then I can continue pulling the intake off. So quite a bit of a detour, but we're making forward progress again, and hopefully no more snags. At this point, I figured since I've got the pan down enough, I don't have a dipstick in there yet. I'm just going to pull the pan right out. I'm going to clean it out right down to nothing. That way, I can just put 7 quarts back in it, and, I'll know that it's full. Looking at this pan for not much runtime, it is absolutely filthy. Now, to be fair, this is an old engine. It wasn't, fully cleaned. I just kind of tore it down and put it back together. But I wasn't really expecting that much dirty oil in, for like 5 minutes of runtime. There was a little bit of flakes in there, but brand new bearings on the rods and the crank. I wasn't too stressed about it. It was not enough metal for me to worry about. After I actually get this driving and on the road and I do my first oil change, then we'll see what it's really like. But all in all, it was fine. No, the pan is just loosely back up. I get the joy of retorquing all of those bolts for the second time in this video. Joy. All right, now it is time for me to put the suspension back up and in place. And one of the things that I did way back when I first built this is I drilled two little pilot after I centered it. So, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, when I first got the the cross member in the car, I did some measurements and I, to the best of my knowledge, centered it in the car or angled it correctly. And then what I did is I drilled two, I think, 1/8-inch holes on either side up through the cross member into the frame rails. That way, if I ever had to drop it, I could reline it back up and be pretty damn close. So you're going to see me, as I'm going through this, I'm going to get a little punch and I'm going to line it up. And I do a pretty good job of it. So in theory, that should still be squared from when I did it the first time. But yeah, so I'm just going to put this all back together. Alright, so with that all back together, this time I pull my head out of my ass and I put some paper towel in the distributor hole so that I can continue removing those bolts without fear of dropping one down and having to do that whole thing again, because that would just, I would lose it. And with that, let's get this intake out of there. Lifts up pretty easy. It was fairly recently installed. Get those fuel lines out, throw it on the cart, and you can't see right now, but there was water leaking out of the water hole on the intake gasket. So at this point in time, I do not believe I have a head gasket leak. I believe 100% it was an intake gasket leak. So after chatting with a friend who's an engine builder, you know, he said, this time when you put it together, make sure you use right stuff around the water jackets on both sides to ensure there's no leak. He said, especially if there's any sort of corrosion on the heads. And after I pulled these intake gaskets off, sure as shit, he's right. There is some corrosion on the head right around the water gaskets, which is most likely why it didn't seal. So this time around, I'm going to do it right. So one other thing I want to do is one of the very first bolts that I pulled out of this, the stud itself pulled out of the block. So since I don't have any right stuff at this point in time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay some paper down in the valley, because I do not want to drop anything down into the valley and into the actual internals. That would make me very sad. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all the studs out, put a little blue Loctite in them, and put them back down. So in theory, that way if I ever have to pull the intake again, only the intake nuts are going to come loose, not the entire stud. All right, well, now that we've got all of these studs Loctited down and reinstalled, we can move over to our steering column. And what we're going to do on the steering column is I'm just going to use my torch. I'm going to heat the column up a little bit just to get a little bit of expansion out of the metals, because I need to be able to pull the actual the steering shaft that connects to the rack out of the slip joint that goes into this column, because I need to be able to pull this in and out relatively easy, and right now that's just not happening. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to modify, I'm just going to file down the steering rack joint until it fits into that slip joint much easier. And I use a combination of a file and then a drum sander. I use the drum sander just to get into that middle crevice, and then it's a little bit easier. But yeah, I really need this to be able to slip into that joint a lot easier, because that if I do that, then I can pull the steering column out, or the steering joint out from the column and the rack, and drop the header down without too much hassle. All right, so now that that fits inside the slip joint of the steering column, we can put the steering column back, or the steering joint back in the car. And then what we can do is take that slip joint, put it back in the column, put the column back in from the car from the inside out. right, well, now that the steering joint is reinstalled and I can pull it out as I need, that's going to make our life a lot easier. But that is all the time that we have for this video. So as always, if you've stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.